Hey YouTube, Dawson Writer here. Welcome to my review for Mighty Morphin Power Rangers issue 110. This is the prelude to the upcoming Darkest Hour event, which is our most significant event in a while. I know we had the Eltarian War semi-recently, but it really feels like the most significant event since Shattered Grid. And this was, as it says with the prelude, is sort of setting the stage for it. And that's kind of all it was. I think it was an all-around solid issue and does a good job setting the groundwork for it, but that's all it really does. And I don't mean that in a necessarily negative way, because that's what it was supposed to do, but I just felt like there wasn't anything necessarily stand out as it was mostly set up. But it had some really good moments in it. You know, we ended off with Rita's forces arriving on Safe Haven where the Omegas are. We get a couple nice moments with Zack and Trini, kind of discussing Draken, that very cliched conversation where one character's like, hey, this villain warned us about something, do they have a point? And the other one's like, no, they're a villain, blah. And so, yeah, that's that conversation. But it kind of, I think, for me, highlights more so that Trini has, I wouldn't say necessarily trust for Draken, but I think she understands that Draken's not necessarily like a black and white type of character. But it's a nice moment nonetheless. But then when the invasion starts, we get two significant character returns. We have the Death Ranger, who I'm really excited that they're a part of this event because they're one of my favorite characters, and I was, you know, not disappointed with their ending, but I was like, oh, there's so much more potential. And I am a little disappointed that at the moment they're kind of a lackey for Rita. I certainly hope that all the characters, like even him and Dane, who is another returning character, you know, the evil Doggy Kruger effectively, I hope that they get some agency in the event, and they don't just act as effectively Rita's henchmen, especially the Dark Ranger. I'm going to imagine that Rita helped them get a body since they were kind of just a loose Palpatine-like spirit last time we saw them, and maybe that's why they're working for him and kind of using it to their advantage. Regardless, it's cool to see them back, and if you didn't know, Death Ranger first appeared again in the Hyperforce one-shot, which is also a lead into this, and they brought with them the Wild Force Rangers that they plucked from a certain point in time. I don't know if it necessarily matters, but I was confused in that Hyperforce issue whether these are the Wild Force Rangers from the timeline we're in now, or from like a different timeline or universe, you know what I mean? Because the Hyperforce universe is different. It doesn't necessarily matter, but I was confused by that. But that's what happens with them. You have some interesting moments too with Zed, who is forming a very, very uneasy alliance with the Mighty Morphin team, as they're like, God, everyone gets a Morpher now, which is just kind of funny. I'm really looking forward to seeing that. Obviously, I don't think it's going to lead to any sort of redeeming moments for Zed or anything, but I hope it has more than just like that classic, like, oh, you know, I'm working with you and then I betrayed you, mwahaha. I'm sure it's going to happen, but I'm interested to see the dynamics that come out of that, and I'm certainly much more happy with where Zed is now in the story than when he started. I was never one of those people that was like, oh my god, Rita beat Zed, it's woke, but it was more like I felt Zed hadn't really gotten a moment to truly shine in this run. Like, we got some really good backstory for him, but I just felt in comparison to Rita, he hadn't gotten as much. Like, Rita has gotten a ton of focus and stuff like that. I was hoping for more from Zed. So I really like the way they ultimately took this direction with this, and I think that it's going to be a much better place. I kind of hope the Alliance goes similar to the Alliance with Shredder in the Mighty Morphin TMNT comic, where Shredder actually worked with them against Rita in the comic, but like at the very end of the comic, of course, it's like, yeah, Shredder's still a villain, he's got plans to work with Lord Zed, but during the main run, the Alliance stood. That's kind of what I hope, just because I feel like the betrayal will be cliche. Maybe some back and forth, I don't know. Regardless, that sets up an interesting dynamic. Perhaps the most interesting, or my favorite set of scenes, I always say scenes like it's a show just because it's instinctual, but is between Grace, Matt, and Rita. So last we left off with Matt, he hadn't gotten my muffin yet! Last we left off with Matt, they broke the spell, or so they thought, using the same logic of how they broke Tommy's spell by destroying the Sword of Darkness, and it seemed like it did something, but obviously it didn't work in the Kumbaya manner that it did for Tommy or 1993 Tommy. So I think it did something. It's really funny because when I was reading this, I'm like, how can we make the story more different? I'm like, oh yeah, just have Matt stay evil after he was broken from the curse. And then I'm like, oh wait, that's Draken. So I think it did break the curse, or it did something, but I think obviously what Matt's been through in combination with his motivations about feeling left behind has left him more of a broken person that's willing to work with Rita. I have such mixed feelings on this story, as it's such a jumble of like, you know, I'm like, oh, why are we doing Evil Green Ranger again? It's so redundant. But also, there's a lot of stuff I actually really quite like about it, and it's made me like the character even more. So I'll just say, I still have mixed feelings about some of the retread, but for the most part, I'm actually kind of digging the storyline. And there's some interesting conversations between him, Grace, and Rita, especially since, as I've mentioned before, one of my favorite things about the creation of this Green Ranger was the parallels they drew between the relationship between Rita and Tommy Green and Grace and Matt Green, which I wish they would have leaned into more before this, but it created some interesting conversations about Grace trying to pull Matt out of this and saying, you know, you're going to feel guilt for what you did later. I think that's going to be one of the most interesting dynamics going into this event. There also is some brief like tension between Tommy and Kim, which I think was hinted at earlier in regards to they were kind of having a miscommunication, and I think that's going to be some potential baggage we'll bring into this event, which should be interesting. The issue then ends, obviously, setting up the event with the most interesting thing where Rita gains access to one of the arches because they're like, oh, she needs one of the arches, but we're here at it. And they're like, no, there is another. She goes to the arch at the Bermuda Triangle, which I initially mistook for, unless maybe I am right about this, the area they went into for Turbo. I think that was something else, though. I think that was called, like, the something else. That was... You know, it had to become someone else. It had to become something else. Regardless, I think that was just me being stupid. But she finds another arch and she uses like magic and the Zeo Crystal and she like infects the grid. Like it seems like it's summoning Dark Spectre or allowing him to infect the grid. Probably a little bit of both, but the language of it seems like that, which is really interesting. I'll be interested to see how that affects things. And I have to say, like, one of my things I've been praising about this run so far, even before this event, is I love how much they've taken advantage of in regards to all of the stories that have been written, whether it's something like Alpha 1 and Go-Go, or something like this, which a lot about the Master Arch lore and Dark Spectre's motivations was set up in Power Rangers universe, which is funny, because I'm sure that, like, when they wrote Power Rangers universe, or maybe I'm not sure, because maybe they did have this in mind, but I feel like when they wrote Power Rangers universe, they weren't like pre-setting up for this, but the way it's written, it seems like that, which is funny because Power Rangers Universe did retcon the emissaries, which I'm actually not that mad about because I prefer that origin, but still, regardless of how it was set up, I really like the way that that story in Power Rangers Universe was about, almost a Draken, Dark Spectre trying to do basically this exact thing, and now it's coming to fruition, and I think that's really cool, and I think we're setting up for a really fun event. As far as the issue itself, I think it was a very solid issue, 3 out of 5. Like I said, I mean, I feel like this is a weird criticism in the sense of saying, like, you know, all it was set up, because that's what it was supposed to be. But, you know, as a result, I feel like there wasn't as many standout moments, and it did just act as set up. It did that well, but as a result, the issue itself wasn't a standout by itself. I hate criticizing it like that, because it reminds me of people, like, criticizing the Geodra Mecha for being cubes. I'm like, you don't have to like it, but they're pulling off exactly what they're going for. One thing I want to note, though, is it's really interesting seeing all these elements come together, like even bringing in Death Ranger and Dane. And obviously, since it's a 30th anniversary event, I'm going to assume we're going to be bringing a lot of things in to this year-long run. But also, I can't help but think in the back of my mind, I'm curious, like, are they setting up for the end of the comics? Again, it's the 30th anniversary, so it would make total sense for us to have a bunch of callbacks and returns. But with the rest of the franchise winding down at the moment, with Cosmic Fury being the last main series, the reboot continually, you know, shooting farther into the distance, and the toy lines winding down, the comics are going to be kind of the last man standing this year. And I'm curious, like, just because this feels like such a culmination, if it could possibly be the end. I certainly hope not, obviously, because the comics are my favorite thing about the franchise, but also because while we go into a pause, you know, for the franchise, I think it would be nice to keep PR around in some form and kind of keep it alive. And not to mention a lot of other franchises seem to do that. I can't say exactly, you know, for how long and what intervals or gaps they had, but it seems to me like franchises like Transformers and Turtles, in between major, you know, reintroductions of TV shows and movies, they always had a comic around in some form. So I'm hoping the same holds true for PR. But what did you guys think of this issue? Are you excited for the Darkest Day event? Let me know in the comments as always. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell. See you in notifications for my videos. Dawson Writer, signing out.